What's going on? This is the DFS Riddler, and today I decided to do a video to show you guys how I use Fantasy Cruncher for building my NFL lines. I'm going to outline my pretty much my entire process for the NFL on a Fantasy Cruncher. After we go through this, I do recommend that you come up with your own process. This is just kind of a guideline if you're new at Fantasy Cruncher or new at doing this or new at doing MME, multi-mass entry in general. This video will hopefully help you learn a little bit more about operating Fantasy Cruncher and how everything works with that, and how to build lines with it successfully. So we're going to go through a step-by-step process. The first step is going to be to decide the construction of your crunch. This is where pretty much I do the same thing every week, guys. I decide what teams that I'm going to be playing, who I'm going to be stacking, and go from there. So basically with NFL, to give you the highest upside of winning a GPP, you want to stack, guys. You want to decide what quarterbacks that you're going to be playing and what games have the highest probability to shoot out, because that's what we want. We want touchdowns from one side, and then we want the other team to come back with another touchdown from the quarterback to his pass catchers, and then go back again. So basically every week we're looking for those games that have the highest upside to be high scoring. So the first step to decide the construction of the crunch, I built something like this in Excel format with everything broken down of what I'm going to do for the week. So basically I think for myself, I decide what teams that I want to play, and I punch them in here on this main card here. So this is for last week's slate. My highest stacked team was Detroit and Oakland. They had a 50.5 over under, high scoring game it was expected to be. So that's gonna be my my main stack. I had 50 lineups stacked with Detroit and Oakland. So I think for that week I was a little bit, this past week I was higher on Matthew Stafford. So for that one I had decided I was going to do 30 lineups with Stafford as quarterback and run it back with 20 lineups with Carr as quarterback. I do the same thing every single week, guys. Like, I play 165 lineups on the main slate, and then I basically just input this information right here on this sheet to decide which teams that I'm going to be playing. So this past week I was on Detroit and Oakland, Tampa Bay, Seattle, Minnesota, Kansas City, Green Bay, Los Angeles Chargers, and the Jets and Miami game. And you can see here the breakdown that I have of how many lineups that I'm going to have devoted to that game stack, going down the list. So that's how I decide what teams that I'm going to be using in my crunch. That's the construction of the crunch right there. So next thing that we're going to do, we're going to go over to Fantasy Cruncher. And the first thing that you want to do for this purpose, by the way, we're going to be using Rewind for the same slate that was played last week to give you a better understanding of what we're doing here. But yeah, the first thing you want to do is upload your projections, which is on this upload tab up here on Fantasy Cruncher. Where you get your projections should be a reliable source. Whether that be, I definitely recommend Daily Roto. Their projections are on point. SaberSim has great projections. Awesemo does a good job at it. So make sure you have a reliable projection source, and you're going to want to copy those projections from that source. And once you copy, you're going to go to the Upload Data button, and then you're just going to click right here and hit Control V to paste all of your projections there. Then you're going to hit Upload Projections. This will upload your projections into Fantasy Cruncher. And I have my projections uploaded from last week in here already, so we're going to roll with those. So that's what you're going to do next. You're going to upload those projections and get Fantasy Cruncher ready to go. Let's look at our next step. Next step for this is going to be to limit your player pool. Basically, how I do this, guys, is I just want to play players that are going to be on the field, players that are going to get targets, players that are, you turn the TV on, the players that you're playing, you want to see them on the field. For instance, Keyshawn Johnson, he's not in the player pool because, I mean, shit. 2 of 3 targets for 22 yards. He's been getting 3 targets, 2 targets, 5 targets. It's very up in the air where this guy could be at. So I don't want to turn on the TV and be in the 4th quarter and waiting for Keyshawn Johnson to get his first catch of the day. So number 1 rule of this, guys, is play good players. Play players that get volume. If Keyshawn Johnson goes off for 35 DraftKings points and kills the slate, and I had 0 of him, so be it. I am okay with saying that I lost that week because of some bullshit Keyshawn Johnson 10 catches that he gets or something. It's unlikely to happen. So basically, you don't want to play players that are unlikely to get there. You want to play good players. So basically, what I do every single week, I go up here to the filter team list and I go through every single team one at a time. So starting off with Arizona, and I limit my player pool. I'm going to take out all the players that are probably not going to do much. So as you see for Arizona, my only players in my player pool are going to be Kyler Murray, Fitzgerald, Kenyon Drake, Christian Kirk. Everybody else, not very fantasy viable, so we're just going to leave them out. And this is already all done, guys, because like I said, we're looking at last week's slate and I have already done all my work on it. But like if you go to Baltimore, look who I have in my player pool. Very small. Lamar Jackson, Mark Ingram, Mark Andrews, Hollywood Brown, Willie Snead. Like I said, basically all the guys that can make a difference in the game. Baltimore is a hard one to pick on because not very many options that you can stack Lamar Jackson with, so that's a tough one. Let's see, a team that had a little bit bigger of a player pool, Detroit, which was my main stack last week. I had all these guys in the player pool: Hawkinson, Galladay, Stafford, Jones, Ty Johnson, J.D. McKissick. Probably, very iffy if you should have those 2 running backs in your player pool, considering how much Detroit passes the ball. But yeah, guys, this is basically how I limit my player pool every single week. First thing I do before I make my crunches, I go through every single team one at a time, and you can just click this tab right here to take people out of the player pool completely, and then just select who you want to be in there. Go with Galladay, Jones, Amendola, go with Hawkinson. That's probably about good right there. Throw in the Lions defense also. You do want to have exposure to all the defenses on the slate. At least that's the way I do. But yeah, guys, like I said, you go through every single team, limit your player pool for each team, and then you're ready to move on to the next step. So let me just deselect Detroit real quick so we get all the teams back into the player pool here. The next step that we're going to look at is to set exposure caps. And this is, like I said, this is another thing that could be different with your process. I'm just showing you my process and what works for me. You can take it with a grain of salt, take it however you want it. Like I said, I definitely recommend finding your own process and finding out what will work for you, because what works for me may not necessarily work for you, and that's the beauty of DFS. There are so many ways to get there, guys. So work on your own process, but giving you a basic idea here of how things are done on Fantasy Cruncher. Um, so yeah, we're going to set our exposure caps for this step. And the way that I do that, um, we'll talk about defensive and special teams, probably the biggest variance that there is. I don't care about this. I don't care about DST at all because it's such high variance. Any of these teams could get a pick six or have a really blowout week. So I kind of want to spread my exposure out for DST. I'm going to run 25% exposure cap for every single team and then let the projections take care of the rest. I don't care. Whatever the projections are, and it's going to give me DSTs based on that, but it's not going to let me have more than 25% of any DST in my lineups that I build. So 25% is a safe cap. It gives you a pretty broad spectrum of what you're going to end up with when you crunch. I do the same thing for tight ends. Exposure 25%, another high variance position. Same thing with wide receivers. Exposure 25%. The only position that I will allow Cruncher to give me more than 25% on is going to be the running back position. Running backs are a little bit easier to predict each week. We pretty much can look at like Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Zeke Elliott, Leonard Fournette. These guys are going to get their 20 plus touches, which gives you a really safe floor, really good upside, high ceiling. So running backs, I'm willing to take more than 25% on each position. What I do to decide my running back exposures, I'm going to sort this column by value. So if we look here at the value, 4.6 salary expected. 4.6 times the salary expected for value. Jalen Samuels was the chalk of the week, and good reason. He was $4,000. He ended up getting 20 fantasy points. I capped him at 50% just because it's all about how much risk you want to take, guys. If you want to be a high risk, high reward player, have high exposures to the players. If you want to take a lower risk and spread your exposure out a lot more, you can limit these guys as low or whatever as you want. But yeah, basically what I do is I sort by value. I know that Fantasy Cruncher is going to shove this guy into every single lineup at 4.6 value, because that's what Fantasy Cruncher does, guys. It takes the information that you give it, and all it does is spit out an optimal lineup based on the projections. Like Fantasy Cruncher wants to give you the highest projected lineups that it possibly can based on the limitations that you give it. So like Jalen Samuels, the field, you can see he was going to be about 52% owned. I decided that for my risk, I wanted to go with 50% of Jalen Samuels, no more than that. Mark Walton also was Fantasy Cruncher would have made him a chalky play for you. He was only owned 15%. For this player, I didn't see the upside there, even though he's projected at 15 fantasy points at a $4,500 price tag. I kind of just wanted to be with the field with him, so 15% is good. I don't want any more than what the field is using in my lineups. So decide to go with the field with him. Royce Freeman, wanted to go with the field with him. James White, 10%. Philip Lindsay, 10%. Derrick Henry, I really liked. So at 21%, I want to go over the field on this running back. So set his exposure at 35%. That's basically how I limit my running backs. But when I start getting down here to the lower projected value guys, I'll just go ahead and leave it at 100% because Fantasy Cruncher, once it gets to these guys, it'll give you a little bit more than these guys that we limited. You shouldn't get 100% of them though, just because their value rating is so much lower. I'm really worried about, am I going to be, I asked myself the question on these like top 5 or 6 projected value guys. Do I want to be over the field or under the field? Because if I just leave it at 100%, Fantasy Crunch, I'm going to end up with like 3 or 4 running backs in my player pool in 165 lineups. And I want a little bit more risk than that. I mean, I'm sorry. I want to have a little bit more than that for my running back exposure. Um, I'm willing to risk more by getting more players in there. So, but yeah, once, like I said, once I get past the top value guys, I kind of just leave the rest of these guys at 100%. Let the projections take care of the rest. But yeah, that's how I limit my player pool, guys. We'll look at the next step that we're going to go through is going to be to, I'm sorry, that's how we set our exposure caps, going back a step. So that's how we set our exposure caps. Next step, we'll get to the good stuff now, building groups. So we're going to go here to the Advanced Options tab, go over to your groups. Now I already have all the groups built that I used for this last week, so we can easily just look at them. If you were doing this from scratch, there would be nothing here and you would have to build these groups. So what you're going to do, our first game that's on the list that I have that I wanted to go with was the Detroit-Oakland game, and 50 lineups is what we're going to do for this game stack. And like I said, I liked Matthew Stafford a little more than Carr, even though both sides I expected to score very highly. So we're going to go with a little bit heavier on Matthew Stafford. We're going to go with 30 lineups with Stafford and then 20 lineups with Carr to make our 50 lineups for this game stack. So we'll see what I did here. The Detroit-Oakland with Matthew Stafford as quarterback. Let's actually just take everything out here so I can do this from the beginning and show you how it's done. X out all these players, X out Matthew Stafford there. All right, so our quarterback, Stafford. If you start typing in here, you can, it'll just pop him up. Click Matthew Stafford. We're going to click this little key button so that we lock him. So what it says here, if the key player is used, then the following group rule is applied. Must use at least 3 players from this group. So then we got to decide who we want to stack with Stafford. If I type in DET here for Detroit, we'll get all the players from Detroit that pop up here. And what you're going to do is hold the Shift button on your keyboard and then click. And that'll keep the list from disappearing once you select somebody. So definitely, we want everybody, all the pass catchers that are viable on the Detroit Lions, we want them in the group with Matthew Stafford. So we're going to go with Amendola, Marvin Jones, Shift click. Who else do we want in there? Who can catch passes from Stafford? Definitely Galladay. Hawkinson is viable. He gets targets. I think that's about it. So there's our Detroit. And we are running a game stack here, so we want to run it back with some Oakland players. So we're going to type in OAK for Oakland. We want all of the viable players, not just pass catchers, but running backs also. All the viable players from Oakland that could possibly give us a lot of fantasy points. So definitely Tyrell Williams, none of these other guys. I don't really like the volume Richard gets, or Zay Jones. Don't really like a lot of their receivers here. Josh Jacobs is definitely viable as a running back there. Hunter Renfrow, we'll throw him in there. He's on the field for a lot of the snaps. That's all that I really see for Oakland that I really want in this group. Some of the groups would include more, you know, you might have 3 pass catchers that are viable, or 3 wide receivers, you might have a tight end. Oh, I'm sorry, we definitely need Darren Waller in here now that I'm saying tight end. So yeah, they're like you want all the viable wide receivers in this running it back. You want the tight end if he's viable, which Darren Waller is. Sometimes, a lot of times they're not. Like if it's a tight end that gets 2 or 3 targets, you don't want him in the group. But Darren Waller definitely is viable. He gets a lot of targets. Um, and running back too, Josh Jacobs. Now, I know that Stafford really, the Detroit Lions, they don't really have viable running back right now. Their running game sucks. Um, but so when you are keying a quarterback like Stafford, let me think of a good example. New Orleans Saints, Alvin Kamara. He's a viable pass catching running back. With Alvin Kamara, you would pair him in the same group with when Drew Brees is locked, just because he's a pass catching running back. But if it's a team like, say, um, let's say like what's a good example of this? Um, Say like a team like the Houston Texans. If you had Deshaun Watson keyed, you would not want to pair Carlos Hyde with him because he's not a pass catching running back. Same with like the Titans. Derrick Henry is not a pass catching running back, so you would not pair him with the quarterback. If the opposing quarterback was keyed, you would pair him because he's a viable offensive player to run back against your quarterback. So that it's all about game script, guys. But like I said, back to this. This is our group for Matthew Stafford, and you got to decide how this is going to work. The more players that you have selected that Fantasy Cruncher has to use in your group, the bigger risk that you're taking, but you are giving yourself a high upside, high reward if the stack actually does work out. So for this, Detroit being a heavy passing team, they don't run the ball very much. I'd like to have 2 of the receivers paired with Matthew Stafford. We'll go ahead and make it a full-on stack, a full five-man stack, and we'll run it back with 2 players from Oakland. So we're going to go with must use at least 4 players from this group. This is telling Fantasy Cruncher every time that Matthew Stafford is used in a lineup, we must include at least 4 players from this group. And that's how I do it, guys. Every single team, like then the next one would be the 20 lineups that we're going to play with Derek Carr as quarterback. If Derek Carr is used, then you must use at least 2 players from this group. So I decided that we would pair Derek Carr with just one of his receivers. It'll either have to pick Williams or Darren Waller, and then run it back with 1 receiver from the Detroit side. And like I said, guys, this is all about how much risk you want to take. You could go with this also. Must use 4 players from this group. Now it's going to have to use both of the receivers to pair with Derek Carr, and 2 of the players from Detroit to pair with Derek Carr. But that's how I do it, guys. Once I decide, who I'm going to be playing for the week, all these teams right here, I make a group for every single quarterback that I'm going to be pairing. Matt Moore, he's going to be paired at least 2 players from this group. We've got all of his receivers for Kansas City. We're running it back with Diggs, Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen, Deshaun Watson, pairing him up with DeAndre Hopkins, Kenny Stills, Darren Fells, run it back with Chris Conley, Leonard Fournette, and DJ Chark. So if you notice, I have pretty tight groups here. Jameis Winston, for instance, that he is viable to throw against, or to throw to Mike Evans or Chris Godwin, pretty much. Like pretty much all of his targets funnel to those guys, so they're going to be the ones in the group. Seattle, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Chris Carson, pretty much the most viable players from the Seattle offense, running it back with those guys. So that's how I build my groups, team by team. Go through every single quarterback off of that list that I'm going to be playing, build a group for them. Group with their with that quarterback's viable receivers, running it back with the viable offense on the other team that we're going to be stacking it with. Yeah, guys. So that's pretty much group building in a nutshell. And we will see what our next step is. Next step is to set the positional stack settings. This is where it gets fun too, guys. So over here we have a position stack tab right up there on the top. And for example purposes, we will go with a full-on game stack with the Detroit-Oakland game, where I decided we're going to pair 2 receivers with Stafford and 2 offensive players from the Oakland Raiders. So I want Stafford to be paired with at least 2 of these guys from his receivers list. So we have wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver, and a tight end. So I'm going to go over here to the position stack tab. I always have this limit rule set too, guys. Limit running back from the same team to 1 player. Limit tight end from the same team to 1 player. Just a basic rule that I have set for every single lineup I build, so that you don't end up with, say, lineups like with the Denver Broncos where you have both Lindsey and Royce Freeman in the same lineup, because we don't want that, right? You have 2 running backs in the same lineup from the same team. They're actually limiting each other's upside, because if one gets 10 carries, one gets 15 carries, most likely both of them are probably not going to get there on fantasy points. So we only want 1 running back from the same team in each lineup. So go back to the stack rules. They said we want 2 of these players to pair with Matthew Stafford, and we have wide receivers and tight end in that. So we're going to go here, stack the quarterback with at least 2 players, a wide receiver and tight end from the same team. Now you can go opposing team or the same game. We're going to go with the same team because we want at least 2 of those players in that group with Matthew Stafford. Add the stacking rule. Now, we want to run this crunch back with 2 players from the opposing team from the Oakland Raiders. We have a wide receiver, a running back, a wide receiver, and a tight end. So now we're going to go here and we're going to go stack the quarterback with at least 2 players of wide receiver, tight end, and running back from the opposing team. All right, so now we have our stacking rule built so that we can crunch this game stack, well, at least for the Matthew Stafford part. That's all set. We're good to go. So the next step that we're going to look at is crunching. Here's where it gets even more fun, guys. Let's go ahead and filter the teams to the teams that we're stacking right now, the teams that we're about to crunch. Detroit and Oakland. All right. We're going to click here off of the running back tab. We're just going to go back to all the players so we can see what's going on. Now, remember before when I limited all of the wide receivers, tight ends, and DSTs to 25% when we first started, and we limited our players, our exposure caps. To actually make this crunch work, we're going to have to throw this back to 100% on the exposures. This is changing only the players in the Detroit and the Oakland game, because we filtered the teams to that. So we're just changing these players back to 100% for the purpose of this crunch. All the other wide receivers, tight ends, and DSTs, they are all still set at 25% globally for the rest of the teams on the slate. So now we're at 100%. What we're going to do now, we're going to lock Matthew Stafford so that every lineup that when we hit crunch, we hit this calculate button, is going to give us Matthew Stafford in every single lineup. And we said we wanted to do 30 lineups with Matthew Stafford. So we're going to calculate 30. We're going to use my projections. Go back up here to the advanced options in general. You want to make sure that you have your unique players set. So we want a good spread of players in our lineup. So we're going to go with 3 unique players. So every lineup Cruncher builds has to have at least 3 different players than the previous lineup that it built. So you get a really good mix of players in your player pool. Also, what I like to do, I like to unclick the flex position off of the tight end right here. That way, I don't really like tight ends to be in my flex position. I feel like you're really limiting your upside there. I either want a running back or a wide receiver. I don't want 2 tight ends in my lineup, so we're going to uncheck the tight end box so that the flex position only applies to wide receivers and running backs. So we're all set here. We got 3 unique players. We got our flex position set. We are ready to crunch some lineups and see what we get, guys. So we'll go ahead and hit calculate. Now, as you see, every lineup that's popping up has at least, we had 4 pass catchers set for Matthew Stafford. Every lineup that's popping up is going to give us at least 2 of those players. So we got Marvin Jones, Amendola, Marvin Jones, Amendola. Looks like we got 87% of Marvin Jones. Not enough Galladay. So I will sometimes do a little bit of manual limits here on this so that can get a good mix of what I want. But this is the basics right here. As you see, we had 2 players set from the opposing team to run it back with. Going back to the advanced options, we had stack quarterback with at least 2 running backs, wide receivers, tight ends from the opposing team. And in that group, we have Renfro, Jacobs, Waller, and Williams. Looking at our lineups, it gave us Waller and Jacobs, Waller and Jacobs, Waller and Jacobs. So we have a ton of just Waller and Jacobs, and we have a ton of Amendola and Marvin Jones. Not very much Galladay. We got a little bit. So we'll try it again. This time we're gonna. I really did like Darren Waller, even though he was a complete flop. I don't want 93% of him running back though. I think if I really like him, maybe I'll go with 60%. And limiting him at 60% is going to naturally boost the other players from Oakland that are in our group. Let's see, same thing with Amendola. I want a good mix of the other receivers, so if we limit him at 50%, let's see if we get more Galladay out of this. Let's hit crunch one more time. Calculate. So we're only getting 50% Amendola. We're getting a lot more Hawkinson. We are still getting a lot of Marvin Jones. We got 50% of Waller. Now we're getting more Tyrell Williams in there. We're getting a better mix, guys. 13% Renfro. So, I mean, this looks good. And like I said, it's all about how much risk you want to take. Not even really sure I want that much Jacobs in there running it back. Even though he was an absolute crush spot. They said it's all about how much risk you want to take. If you're okay with 93% of Josh Jacobs in these 30 lineups running it back against Stafford, by all means, go with it. I mean, in this crunch, it would have worked out. You would have had 93% of those lineups out of the 30 with a 27-point scoring Josh Jacobs. But just Just showing you guys basically how I decide how I want my final lineups to look. So let's see what happens if we limit Jacobs to 60%. Hit calculate again. So now we're getting 60% of Jacobs. We got 57% of Waller. We got 53% of Tyrell Williams. We got 30% of Renfro. So all 4 players that were set to run it back against Stafford, we have exposure to all those players. Still getting a ton of Marvin Jones, Hawkinson, Galladay, 20%. So there's all 4 of your Detroit players. We're getting a good mix of those players as well. Even though Marvin Jones is a little bit high, but hey, if you just want to trust the projections and trust that, you know, that's a good build, what it's giving you there, you know, go with it. If not, you can limit Marvin Jones a little bit. Limit him to the 75%. What happens? Getting 75% of Jones, 50% Amendola because we limited him. Now we're getting 37% of Galladay. Looking a little better. Yeah, guys, I mean, that's how I do this. That's how you do a game stack. Once I decide that, yes, these are my 30 lineups with Stafford, you can label this tab right here, Stafford 30, just by clicking on it. Now we know that this tab is our tab with 30 lineups of Stafford. Now we can go back here and let's do one more just for shits and giggles and get a better idea of what we're doing here. Carr is the quarterback. Let's go with 3 players. I want to stack Carr with one of either Tyrell Williams or Darren Waller, and I want to run it back with 2 of the pass catchers, players from Detroit Lions side of things. So let's delete our old rules. Stack the quarterback with at least one player we have a wide receiver and a tight end. So stack the quarterback with at least one player of wide receiver and tight end from the same team. Now, Cruncher will, every lineup with Carr in it, will need to at least include one wide receiver or one tight end from Oakland to go with Carr. Then for Detroit, we have wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver. So stack quarterback with at least 2 players of wide receiver, take out the tight end, from the opposing team. Add stacking rule. Oops. So now every lineup has to include at least 2 wide receivers from Detroit with it. So there's our stacking rules for Carr. Now we're going to unlock Matthew Stafford. We're going to lock in Carr. We have exposure cap settings, so hopefully this doesn't jumble it up. But to complete our 50 lineups for the Detroit and Oakland game, we're going to do 20 with Carr locked as quarterback. Use my projections. Calculate. Yeah, it's not giving us our lineups because we have too many players limited. Let's go ahead and throw them all back to 100% for this game. Hit calculate. What are we going to get? It's going to give us no Tyrell Williams. It's going to give us 100% Darren Waller based on the projections. So like I said, this is where you got to limit it and decide what you want to do. For this example, we'll just go ahead and limit Darren Waller to 50%. Now it should give us 50% of both Darren Waller and Tyrell Williams because we only have 2 players from Oakland in the group settings. And that's what it did. We got 50% Tyrell Williams, 50% Waller. We're getting 100% of Marvin Jones and Amendola. So let's throw Amendola at 50. Let's throw Marvin Jones at 75 limit. Let's see what we get now. Too much limitations. We'll throw Marvin Jones back at 100%. I want some Galladay in this running it back against Carr, though. So what you can do is you can bump up their projection a little bit by hitting this thumbs up icon. Now Cruncher is going to like Galladay just a little bit more. So let's see what we get now. We're getting obviously 50% Amendola. We're getting a lot more Galladay. We're getting 80% Galladay since I hit that thumbs up twice. 70% Jones. You got 10% Hawkinson, 2 lineups out of 20. So I actually like this build a lot. This is something I would probably roll with. You're getting a good mix of all the players that are set up in our group, and that's what we want. So yeah, that's what it looks like to run it back. Then we could label this crunch Carr 20 lineups. Let's go ahead and delete all of these. So now we have Stafford 30 lineups, Carr 20 lineups. That's pretty much crunching the lineup, guys. So the next step on our list is going to be to combine. For the purpose of showing you how to combine the lineups, I'm going to combining and sorting. I'm going to run one more crunch here so that we have three things to look at. Next one on the list, let's do Tampa Bay, Seattle. I had it set up for 40 lineups for this game. It's my second favorite game. Let's just do half and half. 20 Tampa Bay, 20 Seattle to make up that 40. So before we move to the next team, let's go ahead and take that mark off of Kenny Galladay. Let's unlock Carr. And then don't forget to do this, guys. Set everybody back to 25%, because remember we had them all limited globally at 25%. So we want to set them all back to where they were at. Except for your running back, you can either throw him back to 100% exposure. He was at, let's see, projected ownership 13.1. I wanted to actually go way over on Jacobs. We'll throw him at 30%, keep him there. Now we can switch to our new team. So deselect Oakland, deselect Detroit. Now we have everybody on the slate back here. Now let's limit it to Tampa Bay and Seattle. So we're only looking at those teams. Tampa Bay, Seattle. Throw everybody to 100% so that Cruncher will work when we're stacking these guys. But you can't have just 25% of certain players when you're running 40 lineups of them. So gotta have it. Gotta change this back to 100%. And remember, all the global players, our DST, tight ends, and wide receivers, they're all at 25% still. So we're getting a good mix of our fill-in players to go with our game stack. So the first quarterback we're going to do is Jameis Winston. We're going to do 20 lineups with Winston. He's locked. We're going to go to advanced options. Under position stacks, delete the old settings for the Detroit Lions Oakland game. We're going to go and see what we have on our groups. So for Winston, this is what I built. Must use. Let's do a full game stack just for the purpose of this video. Let's do, but like I mean, this is one of those teams where I don't mind having 100% Mike Evans and 100% Chris Godwin. Jameis Winston and the Bucks, they do not have a running game, so You can expect Winston to throw the ball like 35 to 40 times every single game, giving his wide receivers a lot of targets and a lot of upside. And most of all those targets are all funneled to these guys right here, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. So we're just going to run 100% with them. We're going to run it back with at least 2 of these players from Seattle. So Chris Carson, running back, Tyler Lockett, wide receiver, DK Metcalf, wide receiver. Pretty much the viable players that are on Seattle, right? So we'll go over here. We want to stack Jameis Winston, the quarterback, with at least 2 players of wide receiver from the same team. So every lineup, since this is what's in our group, is going to include Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Now, if you wanted to just stack Jameis Winston with just one of those receivers, stack quarterback with at least 1 player of wide receiver from the same team. And then over here under the groups tab, you want to change this to 3 so that it's only required. Otherwise, it's going to get all messed up. It's going to try to take 4 players from this group, but you're limiting stacking the Jameis Winston with only 1 of these 2 players. So in turn, you're going to get a whole lot more on the Seattle side. So remember to change this number if you're going to change that up. 3 players from the group. Basically, you're looking at your group and deciding how many players from each side that you want to stack with your quarterback. We'll change this back to 4. Change this, get rid of that. Stack quarterback with 2 players of wide receiver from the same team. Then going back to group, we want at least 2 players out of these 3 players from Seattle in every single lineup. So running back, wide receiver. Stack Jameis Winston with at least 2 players of wide receiver and running back from the opposing team. Add stacking rule. Now we are ready to crunch. Let's see, 20 lineups using my projections. Jameis Winston is locked. Let's see what we get. Every single lineup is going to have Jameis Winston, Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin. Running it back with at least 2 of the 3 players from Seattle. So we got 95%. We got a little bit of Metcalf. That's okay though. I don't mind having 95% of Lockett. Guy's a beast. He's a target hog, whatever you want to call. He gets the targets. 75% of Chris Carson. He gets the volume as well. I like it. Let's look at a little bit of the lineups that we got. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Carson, Lockett. We got Carson, Lockett. See what other combinations we can find. Metcalf, Lockett. Should have some Carson, Metcalf in here somewhere too. There you go, Carson, Metcalf. So in a high-scoring game with Tampa Bay and Seattle, we have pretty much covered all the viable areas where the points can be scored from either side of this game stack. We're getting a nice mix of fill-ins here also. A wide receiver tab. We're getting some Beasley, some Preston Williams, some Dorsett, DJ Moore, Jarvis Landry. We're also under the Thursday through Monday tab up here on the game filter, guys. Don't make this mistake. Don't crunch all of your lines for the Sunday slate and then realize that that the setting up here was for the Thursday through Monday slate. Make sure when you're crunching you're on the right settings there. We'll go back to the Thursday through Monday slate so that this correlates, but when we upload these crunches. But yeah, we're getting a good mix of players here, guys. Tight ends, nice mix of tight ends here. We got Ertz, Witten, Ebron, Noah Fant, Benjamin Watson, Hawkinson, Greg Olsen, Jack Doyle. I like it. And like I said, we limited all of our DSTs to 25%. So even though like Cruncher is trying to stick in the Redskins and the Panthers DST in every single lineup, but we said no, we only want 25% so we can get a good mix of others right here as well. So we got a good mix of DST teams. Nice mix of running backs. Remember, we limited Jalen Samuels to 50%. It's all about how much risk you want to take. He was such a good value play. If I left that at 100%, I would have 100% of Jalen Samuels in every single one of these 20 lineups, which actually would not have been a bad idea. Looking back, I wish I would have locked Jalen Samuels in 100% of my lineups, but didn't want to risk that much with him. So went with 50%. We'll go ahead and label this tab Winston 20. Let's go ahead and make our Russell Wilson 20 lineups, and then we will do some combining. So go ahead and delete that. Let's see what we want to do with Wilson. What kind of a group did we build for Wilson? Must use at least 2 players from this group. So we'll stack Wilson with either Lockett or Metcalf and run it back with either Godwin or Mike Evans. Like I said, how much risk do you want to take? You could build your 20 lineups with 4 players from this group. Then every single lineup would have Lockett and Metcalf, Godwin and Evans in it. Like I said, how much risk do you want to take? And I don't have Chris Carson in. I don't have Chris Carson in this group because, I mean, even though he does get a nice target share sometimes, it's not consistent. He's more of a bell cow running back. He runs the ball a lot, so I don't really see the correlation with Wilson and Carson together in the same lineup. Just because Carson is not most likely going to be, he's not going to be catching a touchdown pass from Wilson. If he's getting a touchdown, he's going to be rushing it in. So I don't have Carson in here. We'll go ahead and leave this at 2 players for the group. So we have wide receivers from Seattle. We have wide receivers from Tampa Bay. So let's do this. We'll stack the quarterback with at least 1 player of wide receiver only from the same team. Stack the quarterback with at least 1 player of wide receiver from the opposing team. Now, every lineup that we build with Wilson as a quarterback should include at least 1 player, either Tyler Lockett or Metcalf, paired with at least 1 player of Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. So that is set. Let's unlock Jameis Winston. Let's lock in Russell Wilson. Let's do our 20 lineups and see what we get. Okay. So we got 100% Godwin and no... yeah, we don't want that. We got 95% Lockett and only 5% DK Metcalf. So if I was running this game stack, I want to mix it up a little bit better than that. So what we could do, we'll give Mike Evans a thumbs up. We'll give Metcalf a thumbs up. Let's see how that works out. Calculate 20 more. Now we're getting a little less Godwin, a little less Lockett. We're getting 25% Mike Evans. For this purpose, let's see what happens. Let's just limit Godwin to 40% because I would much rather have just 60% of Mike Evans. So now we're going to get 60% Mike Evans, 40% Godwin. Still 90% Lockett. I'd like to have a little more Metcalf in there than that. So let's limit Lockett to 75%. Oops. Now let's see what we get. Got 75% Lockett, 60% Evans, 40% Godwin. 25% Metcalf. Yeah, I like it. This is probably, if I was running this type of a game stack, this is probably where I'd want to be at with it. You know, mix it up a little bit, get some of each player that's in our groups. So let's roll with that. Let's go Wilson, 20. Delete some of these other crunches. All right, so that's pretty much it. That's making groups, making positional stacks, and crunching your lines. That's how I do it, guys. That's how I do it every single week. Now let's look at the next step on our list. Is going to be combine. So let's go ahead and combine everybody that we crunched right here so far. Let's go to car, go to select lineups, move 20 selected to the Stafford 30. So those 20 lineups are going to go over there to the Stafford, close it. Winston, 20. Let's move 20 lineups over to the Stafford. We want to combine all these lineups together that we just made. Let's move the Wilson lineups over there. Oops. Move 20 selected to Stafford. Now, when we look at our Stafford tab, we built 90 lineups. You use 61 players. Everything is combined. Looking good. Now what we're going to do, next step, sort by ascending. This is something that is very important in my process, and I'll show you why in just a second. But what you're going to do is you're going to go to the sort lineups tab, change it from descending to ascending with the order produced selected. Now, if you look here, we first created the Stafford lineups, then the Carr lineups, then the Winston lineups, then the Wilson lineups. So the way that these are going to go in order is exactly how you like your highest projected lineup for Stafford, then your highest projected lineup with Carr as quarterback, then your highest projected lineup with Winston, Wilson, etc. Then it resets. Next in line, your second highest projected lineup for Stafford, your second highest projected for Carr, your second highest projected for Winston, and then your second highest projected for Wilson. And it just keeps on cycling that way all the way through. Matt Stafford, Carr, Winston, Wilson, Stafford, Carr, Winston, Wilson. So everything is sorted by ascending, and I'll show you why that's important here in a second. First, we'll look at the next step. Download the DKEntries file and sort it. So if we go over here to DraftKings, you go to your lineups, go to the lineups tab, you're going to hit edit entries. You go to the slate that you're building lineups for, so you're going to select that slate. You're going to hit download. Once you hit download, you're going to get your CSV file that has all of your entries in it downloaded. And this is what it's going to look like. You're going to download it, then you're going to open it in your spreadsheet, and this is what your file is going to look like, your CSV file. Download entries and sort. Okay, so this is where I'm going to show you why sorting your lineups that you just built in Fantasy Cruncher, why it's important to sort those by ascending. Look at our contest here. This is already all sorted. I'm going to show you how to do it though. So when you first download your entries file, it's going to show you the entry fee right here where this tab is. So the entry fee for this contest, the 200K first down, was actually $1. So that used to say $1. What I do is I change the entry fee tab to how much the contest pays out to first. So this particular contest paid $10,000 to first place. And you're going to take that and just copy it, drag it down so that all of those say $10,000. Same thing with this, the 35K jukebox, 3,500 for the first place prize. I got the 10K dime package, $200, $100 winner take alls. So like I said, first this tab right here is gonna have your entry fee, like 25-cent contest. Obviously, it used to say 25 cents. First place pays $40, so I'm going to change that to 40. So once you do that and you change in all of your entries to say what first place will pay, then you will sort them all. So you would start at the entry ID column, select everything, drag it down, sort the entire CSV file, right-click it, go to sort range, sort it from highest to lowest, and we want to sort by column D because column D is the value field that we were changing to change each contest to show what first place will pay, highest paying place. So then you'll hit sort, and that will sort it all so that your contests that pay the least are at the bottom, $25 for the $250 dime package, and your contests that pay the most are at the top. Now we'll go ahead and let's just go ahead and delete this, and we will input the 90 lines that we just built just to show you these purposes. So we deleted all those lineups. Let's go back here. We are going to hit export lineups. Remember, we sorted all these lineups by ascending. And I'll show you why in just one second. Make sure you're exporting to so we're on Thursday through Monday. If you were playing the Thursday through Monday slate, make sure you're exporting to that slate, or else it's not going to work when you upload it to DraftKings. We'll just hit that, export it. So then this is this entry file, let's go ahead and open it. File, open, upload that file. There it is right there, Stafford 30. All right, it's loading. I like to expand this column a little bit right here so I can see what I'm actually copying. What we're going to do is these are all the lineups that we just built. We're going to select them all, Control C for copy. We're going to go back to this entries tab, and we're going to hit Control V. So now those 90 lineups are all inputted right here. And the reason that we sorted those lineups by ascending is this. If you look at our 200K first down contest that has a payout of $10,000 to first, our highest projected Matthew Stafford lineup is going to be in there, followed by our highest projected Derek Carr lineup, followed by Winston, followed by Wilson, followed by our second highest Stafford lineup, all the way down. So basically what we are making sure that we're doing is we are putting our highest projected lineups with a mix of of all the different quarterbacks and stacks in the highest paying contests. So the lowest projected lineups are all going to end up down here in our lower paying contests. If that makes any sense, guys, you're giving yourself a lot more upside to hit that first place with one of these lineups that are the highest projected. So that's how I do it, guys. That's how I pretty much do this. And once you we only have 90 lineups here, and I had 165 before that. So, but once you have all of your lineups pasted here to fill out all of your contests, you're going to go to File, Download it as a CSV file. Now we got it downloaded. It is ready to upload into DraftKings. This is not going to work, obviously, but for a couple of reasons. But what you would do is go back to DraftKings. You would select that slate that we just did this all for, and you're going to hit Upload CSV. And there's that DKEntries file that we just downloaded. You would hit that. It's not going to upload any of them because, well, for one, when we exported our lineups, we exported it to the main slate, and it was we built the lineups on the Thursday through Monday slate, if you remember. So always make sure that that is correct when you are starting this. If you are building for the Sunday slate, make sure that you are selected for the main slate, and then export the lineups to that same slate. You know, all of this has to correlate, or else it's not going to work. It's also not working because this slate is obviously over with. So, and that's not this is actually next week's slate that I have those lineups built or entered in for. But that's how you would do it. If I was building my lineups for this next week's slate and hit upload, everything should successfully upload. You would see 165 of 165 uploaded. But yeah, guys, that is pretty much it. Those were the next steps right there. You paste the crunch that we did to the DKEntries. We save the crunch, and then you upload it to DraftKings. Everything that you just built is uploaded into your dummy lineups, and you are ready to go. You are ready to play some DFS. Sorry the video was so long, guys. I hope that it helped you with the basics of Fantasy Cruncher and helped you with building an NFL process for this. Processes are different for each sport, guys, but this should give you a pretty good gist of how I do it for NFL. Like I said, take it with a grain of salt. Make your own process. Test it in a Rewind. I can't stress this enough. Rewind is a free tool, and just back test all of your process and see where those lineups would have ended up. Because see here in Rewind, it tells you what your actual, because this slate has already happened. We would have scored these scores. Let's sort them by the actual score. So out of all of those lineups that we built, change back to descending, our highest scoring lineup was a 225. Not fucking bad, right, guys? That is pretty solid. And this was the epitome of my fucking lineups this past week. Oh my god. I ended up with over 50% of Darren Waller, and he produced an actual score of only 7.2. So, man, just like the difference of having like Zach Ertz in here would have boosted that 225 up significantly, and probably I would have taken down quite a few different contests had I not had 50% exposure to Darren Waller. But like I said, this is the benefits of Rewind, guys. You can go back and see what you did, see what you could have done, get the right players in there to get that score higher, and build your process off of that. Um, that's what it's all about, guys. Just building a process that consistently works. Um, and that's what we want. We want a repeatable process that we do every single week. Like I said, it all starts with, for me, it starts on this sheet right here, deciding every week what teams that I want to put in here. Like this next week, I will change all of these teams up. They'll all be different, but this number over here will probably still always be the same. I'll still have 165 lineups. It's just deciding what teams I want to be heavy on and what teams I want to be extremely light on, like this New York Jets Miami game. So we can't play every single player on the slate, guys. We got to play the players that we think are going to get us there. Sometimes they're wrong, sometimes they're right. This is the process that works for me, though, guys. Just thought I would share it with you. I hope that it helps you guys. So let me know what you think. That'll be it for this video. Good luck this week in DFS, as always.